Hello everyone, this is Meenakshi Ramesh from tapyourwaytohealing.com. Today is April 3rd, 2023, and today I have a guest here with me. Her name is Andrea Pusey, who is also an Andrea Pusey, who is also an EFT practitioner. So before we get started, I will read her bio. Andrea Pusey is an international speaker based in the UK. She has been practicing EFT since 2007 when she first trained with EFT master Jackie Crooks, and in 2011 qualified as an EFT trainer with EFT master Gwyneth Moss. Through her personal experience and her voluntary work with the National Autistic Society, Andrea gained invaluable insights on how to adapt her sessions to meet the specific needs of clients on the autism spectrum. Through the very positive results achieved, the National Autistic Society regularly referred clients to her. Andrea is passionate about EFT and would like more caregivers and care providers to consider using EFT with people on the autism spectrum. Andrea can be contacted via her email address pusey.andrea@yahoo.com. Welcome, Andrea, to the channel, to the show. Thank you for doing this for our audience, and I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from you in the next 30-40 minutes or so. So let's get started on how you found tapping. If you can talk briefly about how you came across tapping and your journey helping clients with tapping.
Yeah, it was a friend of mine who one day said, I had a lot of stress at the time, and she literally started, oh, try this, and she tapped away. And like everybody, I looked at her and thought, what on earth is this about? However, she did one thing which was absolutely brilliant and talked about that there was this one-day course one could attend. And because I'm an eternal student, I obviously was very keen to go. And what was really, really interesting, I was lucky enough to be with Jackie Crooks, who obviously is a phenomenal EFT master. And obviously, once you see the results of EFT, you get hooked. And what happened then is, while I was sort of training, I was again very, very fortunate that I was invited to go to charity events. And again, I was able to sort of show people the tapping and spread the word around with tapping. And it's almost like, once I started, I couldn't stop. And how it worked with, getting the experience, because I like charity work, I would always sort of offer somewhere along the line. And it is absolutely astonishing, all the things you learn. And I was fortunate enough to actually learn or through a person who was on the autism spectrum, except neither of us knew that at the time. I just realized tapping wasn't working quite the same way as with other people, or they didn't respond the same way. And so I started obviously doing, once the person was diagnosed, things made sense. And I started reading up about it, started going to the National Autistic Society's training courses just to learn more and understand what was going on. And sort of when I then started talking about the results I had with my client, that's when the National Autistic Society became very interested in tapping, EFT, and obviously what it could achieve. And so in a way, I sort of feel tapping found me and autism found me. It was almost like, I was just meant to go that direction.
I totally agree, and it's there's more and more people needed in this for more and more people needed to help this population because there are more and more kids entering the system and the society, and there are more adults who are emerging, and they are going into jobs, they are going into life transitions, and tapping is such a great tool that all of these individuals can benefit from. So my next question would be, since many children and adults on the spectrum have sensory related issues, when you begin working with a client, do you start tapping right away, or do you start with the touch and hold or touch and breathe protocol?
Okay, so before I even answer that, I would like to say that I absolutely find Stephen Shaw's quote brilliant, because it talks about if you met one person on the autism spectrum, you met one person. Because one of the things I find is that everybody responds so differently, and definitely one size doesn't fit all. So what I've noticed is I can generalize, or I can come up with sort of different suggestions. If a person enters the room, let's say a client, I first of all like to find out how nervous are they, how anxious are they? Because if you think of going to, let's say, I don't know, to a hospital appointment, you would be anxious, or anybody would be anxious. But for a person on the autism spectrum, they're coming into a new room, they're meeting a new person, there's new environment, new smells. It can be very overwhelming. So what I would always like to say is just observe what the person is like. Can they even make eye contact? I mean, I've had clients who literally couldn't even look at me, and they would look everywhere else, and they would so showing them how to do something was almost near impossible. And one of the things I would do is actually just observe what are they able to do. Find out if the caregiver is there. From the caregiver, what can the person do? But also just observe myself. If they are comfortable with tapping, then actually ask them what would be easier for them to do. But what I generally find is that, as much as I would love to instantly go into tapping, I notice it isn't easily possible. So one of the things is, if they can make eye contact and they can observe what you do, so are they comfortable to touch their face? Because, again, if you think about it, we literally putting shadows in our eyes. And for somebody who's very, observant that way, easily triggered that way, be far too much. So anything around the face, plus your hands smell. And again, most people don't realize or don't pay attention to it. But when you're on the autism spectrum, that could be so invasive for you. You might not be comfortable with that. It might cover your face and you can't see what you want to see. So one of the things I do is, for example, I use a teddy bear. A little teddy bear is good enough, or I've got even bigger teddy bears I can use. Sometimes I would actually just start with slow things. So I would do what I call the karate chop stroke. So I encourage them, and I would say, you start at the wrist, doesn't matter which hand, and just gently stroke. And if you would yourself just literally right now, just stroke, just notice how beautiful that feels and how soothing.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's literally just a gentle stroke, because one of the most important bits is when you get a new client is to actually make them feel as comfortable as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I find this usually sort of helps, and one can talk while they do that. And again, I can then observe more. And if they are okay with doing something else, I may show them, once we've done that a few times, I might say, okay, so why don't we do the hand pressing? Because again, we're touching more points, but again, I can see how comfortable are they. Because, when you're on the autism spectrum, you sometimes are very, very precise. And you want to know where to start. How fast do I do it? How much pressure do I put on here? And even though you and I might just whatever feels right, but when you're very tense, you might want to follow the instructions very carefully. So what I notice is, how comfortable are they with this? And if they still seem to be nervous, and you know that they're shaking, that their breathing is very shallow, then I might just continue that for the rest of the session. If, on the other hand, I find that they're getting more comfortable with me, with the environment, they can look at me, I might then introduce what I call the sort of hand tracing. And it literally is, again, where you start at the beginning of the wrist and you just trace with 1 or 2 fingers up the finger, down the finger, and up the finger, down the finger. Now, what this does, it again gets them used to touching fingers, touching themselves, and you can talk them through it. You can again do it very slowly. They're touching all points, which we know are tapping points. So again, you're getting more points in there. The hand is always available, and it feels again different. I don't know if you noticed that. It just feels slightly different doing it this way. And
Right.
what I would do is, I would do 2 or 3 of those. And again, because I don't want my hand sort of being in between, and then we stop and maybe try, talking a little bit more. But what I have noticed is, so I would alternate between this and maybe the other one, because with the hand tracing, you can be maybe a little bit faster. But even that, I've noticed, sometimes can trigger people. And I noticed they would watch, how does she do it? And, when you do it on the fingers, it's not as difficult. But what I've noticed is, if you're trying to explain the points, sometimes the autistic person isn't very well coordinated, and they actually don't know where the eyebrow starts, and that can bring more stress. So anything that can reduce anxiety, can reduce the stress, will help to build rapport. So to come back to your question, I literally start very slowly, unless I know they've done things like tapping before, or sometimes younger kids, they might respond easier, but sometimes younger kids hide under the table, so you don't even have a chance to show them these points. However, the good news is, even if the other person can't do any of those things, I mean, it's taken me, there was one lady, it took me almost 3 months before she was comfortable with tapping. And I always say, take your time, because if something is difficult for neurotypical people, this can be an absolute mountain to climb for somebody who is on the spectrum, because it can trigger them so much. And said, also, you mentioned about the breathing. Oh my word, because again, it can be quite triggering for someone. So what I like to do there is introduce the breathing again in a fun way or a different way. So I'll give you an example. So again, if I use this hand, I might say something like, when we go up the finger, we breathe in. When we go down the finger, we breathe out. And I would literally make a lot of noises so that it doesn't become, again, that they're not sort of conscious of what's going on. I try to make it a bit of a fun thing rather than a teacher training thing or pupil thing, because that can be triggering. So literally would come up with them, and let's breathe in, and out, and breathing in. And again, it sort of makes it a little bit more fun, but it introduces possibly breathing in a sort of easier and more fun way. And hopefully then when you are wanting to do the touch breathe, they're more ready to do it. But it might be at a 3rd or even a 4th session, depending on how the person can cope. How much interaction are you getting? How much eye contact are you getting? Are they shaking when they're doing even just simple bits? Sometimes, as I said, it's sort of client-led, and I always suggest be in a rush. Rather concentrate on building the rapport, and then everything else will follow beautifully in that. So what I sometimes also do to introduce the breath, take a pen and paper and literally say to the person, okay, there's your pen and paper, and I make it so that the page is horizontal, and I draw breathing in like a mountain and then draw breathing out. And it's again just helping to take away the heavy concentration on the breath, but rather just introducing it in a way that it hopefully can help the person a bit more.
That's beautiful, Andrea. As you were asking me to do this, I was relaxing myself because honestly, I think I was very nervous. So when I started doing this, oh my God, it's so relaxing. And parents, if you're watching this, this is a wonderful way to introduce, we don't even have to use the word tapping. This is just more of like, mindfulness and a relaxation technique which is so easy to use. You can use it when you're in the car, when you're, traveling, when you're watching TV, reading a book to your child, any age for that matter. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for your, detailed explanation and answer to the question. The next question would be, do you see from what you're saying, you go very, very slow and steady, like after you establish rapport and maybe like after 3 or 4 sessions, you are into a session where you're really, talking to the client and you're tapping with them. As you and me know, when we begin tapping, emotions can come to the surface. And when we work with clients, we always tell them that, it's a clearing tool. So it's very normal for these things to come up, and you're in we establish safety and everything. And since we are there, we just tap and guide them and facilitate the process so that it's not so very triggering. But do you notice the same, during sessions with your clients who are on the spectrum?
Okay, there's quite a few things. First of all, I noticed that, yes, emotions do come up, and you can see them in, where maybe somebody starts crying, or where maybe suddenly they look down again, they're closing off a bit. So you may not get quite the verbal response you might be otherwise used to, but there's lots of telltales. What I've also noticed is that sometimes words are missing. So one of the things I do is literally what I call, something where I can highlight what can be used. So give you an example. I've worked with clients who couldn't use the word I'm happy, I'm sad. They just couldn't express it. It's almost like they felt something but didn't know what word would correlate to it, even though they were exceptionally verbal with other things, but when it comes to emotion, they were almost they just couldn't talk about it. So what I've started doing is, and there's many varieties, literally just like a, sort of a plate of, hang on, are you feeling more like this today, or are you feeling more like that today? A simple tool like this, or what I've even, where I would literally have a picture, point to which one is more appropriate for you today. And sometimes you can even get hold of, stickers, thing that can help. So I've had, again, quite a few sessions where the person wasn't able to tell me what they were feeling, but they were feeling it. And what I tend to do then is I would literally do first of all, I give time, because I notice that they tend to get embarrassed about having these feelings. It's almost like they don't know what to do with it, but also because they're not always used to showing feelings, because, they almost seem to hide away, because a lot of them are actually loners, maybe not have a lot of friends, maybe, like I said, can't verbalize certain things, but there's things one can do. So when these emotions come up, like I'm thinking of one specific gentleman, it possibly was the first time he's ever cried in front of somebody, and he was so embarrassed, and he almost wanted to apologize. And it was a Zoom session, so he walked away, and I literally just gave him the space. I didn't talk. And when he eventually came back and sat down, we just did that. And he knew I'm there for him. I didn't try to talk it down or up. I let him just be. I gave him the space he needed at the time. And then what I did is, because he, for example, wasn't very verbal, and what we did is, okay, I thanked him for actually trusting me enough that he allowed these emotions to come up. And what we then did, I encouraged him to just draw what he felt. And again, I absolutely adore, sort of just crayons, because I find crayons, if you want to draw fast, or when you're not very coordinated and you struggle, then with crayons, do super duper fine art drawings that way, because they're too thick. Sometimes I even use something quite different, like round crayons, where you really can't draw very precisely. So, and just allow the person to just express it that way. Sometimes, again, what I would do is say, okay, I see you were quite upset, and I may ask them, okay, to what color does that correlate? Just a color. So I'm not trying to ask them, what was it? I.e., do you feel sad? Do you feel frustrated, or whatever those tears? I may just literally say, okay, like, what color was it? And then what I would do is, so let's assume they chose the color red. And then what I do is, again, with that stroking, and let's talk about the color red, this red feeling, to allow them to work through that, but also to normalize that it's okay to show these emotions and then do something with that. So depending what emotion comes up, I do different things. So if I notice somebody gets quite agitated or quite sort of angry somehow, again, I may encourage them to draw their anger. And this is, for example, a young person I was working with, and he was exceptionally angry. And I think you can sort of see from here, and he wrote on here to stop getting annoyed. And with him, it was encouraging him to get that anger out. So, so depending on what emotion comes up, I then give them the space, and then use the tapping in order to help move the emotion along. Once they sort of feel a bit more okay in this emotion, obviously, if they can talk about it, one encourages that. But if they can't talk about it, which unfortunately quite often happens, then you need to find another way. The other bit I want to highlight is that if I were to ask you right now, how do you feel? You might go, oh, boom, and you've got an answer. That doesn't quite always work like that with people on the spectrum. Sometimes I ask the question, and then you can wait a minute or two, and depending on what else is going on, I sometimes just keep quiet for 2-3 minutes while they think about it, because I don't want to put a word in their mouth. And while they maybe connect a certain feeling with a certain word. And again, take your time, because unfortunately, one of the challenges a person on the spectrum has is that they sometimes don't have people to talk to, like friends, so sometimes it's all just them in their head, or maybe just their parents. But yeah, they don't have that vast, maybe, group of people they could discuss certain things with. So again, just take your time and just let them be, and be present, and make sure they know it's okay to have those feelings, whatever they may be.
Awesome, awesome. So that answers my question about, I was going to ask you about anger outbursts, and I think using the colors is a great way, because that's something all of us and all of them can relate to. Just like how we ask clients in a session, like, is there a color to that feeling? How would you describe it? So that's a very useful tip. And I think I can do this all day long. This
It
is
is
just this,
beautiful.
yes. This is just so awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. Um, so I think do you give assign some kind of a homework for clients in between sessions? Do you depending on the age, if they do you let the parents know that this is something that they can try at home, or do you teach the parents the basic recipe? Just I'm curious because the reason I ask this question is there are so many interventions out there for the treatment, for autism treatment. And when I've always shared tapping with parents, with small groups. I have a Facebook group with, who have with parents who have children and adults on the autism spectrum. So parents always ask me if they can use this for their children and their young adults or adults. I always tell them yes, absolutely. But my message is to encourage parents to tap on themselves first, because
Yeah.
that is how tapping helped me. Because the more I began regulating myself, I was able to be more present for my son. So I'd like your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so absolutely agree, because parents, from the diagnoses to the frustration, maybe through fighting the system, or maybe trying to get support, being tired or being embarrassed, sick and tired of explaining why their child is behaving however it's behaving, maybe everything being more of a burden. Yes, parents or caregivers have a lot going on, because they've had quite a lot of challenges to, maybe even just get their child to eat, or maybe just to go to school or whatever it might be. So absolutely agree for the parents to do something for them. And even if only, without words, just doing something like that, because again, it helps the parents. Obviously, there's also a possibility that the parents themselves could be on the spectrum and may not know it, or maybe have learned coping strategies. So again, one needs to be mindful that one doesn't trigger the parents. So what I've done is I would try to associate the tapping as sort of something to help regulate. And one of my clients, for example, he's got a tapping bear at home, and it's got all the different points, and he knows that when he feels really, really bad, he can use the tapping bear. And to him, it's almost like a reminder to do something. But again, it's one of those things that if the person is so overwhelmed, then they may not be able to do homework. So I don't try to make it an extra burden for the person themselves. Yes, I encourage the parents to do it, because obviously we also know if the parent starts tapping in front of their child or young adult, what will happen? The mirror neurons fire up, which means even though the person watching the parents tapping, immediately it does something to them, and that's been proven. And that's how people learn. So obviously the parents sitting tapping, however they tap, in front of the child, they're already doing some good. They're normalizing the tapping. So when the young person then goes then, for example, to their session or their therapy session, they're more used to this tapping because they've seen their parents do it. Now, again, there's obviously the surrogate tapping, where let's say the parents taps on themselves, but they would tap in a way where they would concentrate on, let's say, what's going on for their child. So they would say something like, oh yes, Peter really struggled at school today, and he was really unhappy about what happened, and talking like that. And then obviously once the parent has done a few statements like that, obviously they can then talk as if they're talking to Peter, to say things like, yes, I know today's been tough for you. And again, they tap with what they know, what potentially could have upset their child. And again, we know that can help, provided the parents have done some tapping on themselves, because it's not an enforced thing. And we know that the more open we are, or the more healing we've done as parent, the more we are open to let our child be how they need to be at that moment. And the more we give permission for them to also maybe have a mini meltdown because school has been so tough for them, let's say, or even work or whatever. So I always say to parents, if you can do the work, absolutely. But I'm also fully aware what a mega job a parent has to do additional with the homework or, you know, going shopping or whatever it is, and whatever this autistic young person might be struggling with, or even adult might be struggling with. So yeah, so I totally agree. Homework is brilliant, but I always say, if you can do it, brilliant. But if you can't do it this week, maybe next week. So I don't want them to feel guilty and then not come back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, it needs to be sort of that they understand it's okay, because I know you've got a lot going on. However, if you do that, maybe you will breathe a bit easier. Maybe you can cope just that little bit better. So I'm trying to sort of come up with that. But sometimes for the parents, it might bring up tears because, you know, or for all the sadness they feel for their child, let's say. So again, one needs to be aware that tapping can bring up obviously emotions. So one needs to make sure the parent is aware what might be going on. What I also sometimes do is encourage the parent to talk about something that might have upset them in what I call sort of smaller versions. So, oh, I was really upset today. This woman just stole my parking at the shop. I know it sounds like a silly example, but again, to show parents can also be upset about something. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to talk about it, no matter how minor, and it normalizes to actually share potentially what goes on for the autistic child or young person.
Right, right. Yes, yes. Totally agree with you. Yeah. And it can bring up emotions. I have cried a river of tears tapping, but then once I got, trained, I understood how this thing works. I understood that, oh, this is all, I'm just releasing all the stuck energy and this is going to help me go a long way. So, but
Yeah.
initially it's very difficult when you're alone, when you don't have support. It can be overwhelming, which I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, let me see the time. So with so many interventions for autism, what is the scope of EFT as an intervention? What do you think? Do you think that there is enough scope with this intervention for autism?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. Because first of all, one of the problems a lot of parents face is that there aren't enough support people out there for potentially their child. And people often say, I wish I had more support. And depending where you live, depending on, if you can go private or not, you may not get always the intervention you want. But we know that tapping is definitely helping with calming down the system. There's been enough research done to prove that, people's heart rate goes down, their breathing slows down, all those things which actually help with the motion. So to me, absolutely, it has a big place. Obviously, if the child needs something like an occupational therapist, it works alongside that. It works alongside trying to reduce the anxiety, trying to help to cope with sensory overload, trying to cope with, learning how to do eye contact or whatever it might be. So I believe, and from my own experience, I can honestly say EFT does have a place. Yes, you may need a speech therapist, and yes, you may need somebody like an occupational therapist, or, you may need others. But the good news is the emotional part is so important, because one of the things which always, by the time the person becomes a teenager, often depression sets in. Girls self-harm, the boys hide away in their room, and their life becomes smaller and smaller and more confined. So the more we can take care of those emotions as they're growing up, the bullying they might experience, the more obviously there's a chance that that young person can actually go out there in the world and achieve anything anybody else achieves, maybe even more.
Beautifully said, and that gives a lot of hope for parents, including myself. Every time days that I feel that I feel very low, I just like begin tapping. First, I begin tapping on myself, and this is a tool I come back to time and time and time again. And I'm I'm still in awe. It blows my mind, as to
Yeah.
how this technique works so beautifully.
Mm.
So have you worked with I think you answered, you covered this little bit, in the previous answers, but still, have you specifically worked with individuals who are non-verbal or who have limited language? And
Yeah.
as you said, maybe you may start off with this with them as well, but then how do you proceed?
Okay, first of all, if a person isn't very verbal, that's fine. Can they nod their head or shake their head? Can they point to a color? Can they point to a smiley face or sad face? Can they repeat things in their head? So again, it all depends where they're at. So I worked with somebody who primarily could go yes, no, because of, the struggles they had. But what was interesting is that you can work because you say the words and you say to them, listen to the words. And if you can repeat them in your head. It's absolutely fine. And I think as a therapist, you just need to be more observant. What happens when you said something? How is their face? How is the, body language? How is their breathing? Just notice these things, and accordingly you can adjust things or ask more questions. Also give time for processing. I mean, I worked with someone, and the way he was sitting, it was on Zoom, and every so often he would do this for quite some time. And then I would say eventually, are you watching television? Yes. And they were, because what they did is they had to have time out from what I was saying. And that's okay, because they need a processing time. And if you can give that, then you can work with anybody, because they can think about it. And when they come back to you, you can see what's going on. They're ready for whatever else you're coming up with. And I actually find you can almost work more intuitively that way with them, in the sense it doesn't matter what the mouth says, because you get the whole sense from them. And, when they smile, it's a big beam, because you can see it. It's amazing. So absolutely do not let that stop you at all, because there's enough things you can do. And again, I mean, the person who was nonverbal, well, I said to them, okay, do you like going to work? Or, and they would say no. And then I said, okay, draw how you feel about work. And once they drew it, oh my gosh, it was obvious there was something going on there. And what I'm saying is, people can still draw, and you can get a sense. School, draw me what school feels like. And you can see when school doesn't look good. And how would you like it to feel like? Or, once you've done a bit of that, you draw again, and then see sort of what happens with it. So absolutely, it doesn't have to be verbal. Just, talking slower, maybe giving more thinking time, choosing the words carefully so they're not ambiguous, and just observe and be there for them.
Yeah, and also, like you said, showing the emotion icons and the colors, those are great ways, that we can integrate tapping. That's a wonderful tip, Andrea, and thank you so much for that. This would be the final question. Like, could you share some experiences from your practice on how tapping helped your clients, like some success stories where you felt, some aha moments? Yeah, if you have.
Oh, to be honest, there's been quite a few, because I've obviously worked with quite a few clients now, but eye contact. You know, somebody could never, ever give eye contact, and to get them to actually look at people. I mean, what an experience it's been. But, you know, I also would blindfold myself so they can look at me, so that we would really work as a team. Or the first time somebody made a sandwich, because again, you know, one thinks, I'm making sandwich, nothing to it. But one of my clients was so nervous. Well, how much butter do I take? How many slices of ham should I put on? What if I don't put the ham straight onto there? How do I then cut it diagonal? What do I do here? What do I do there? And, you know, for us, it's, oh, well, do whatever. But no, he was so nervous. He was shaking when we sort of talked it through and even sort of practiced it. You could see. And again, the first time he made a sandwich, that beam, you know, that always is amazing. Or when you work with someone who's never been to a movie because they get so triggered by it, too many people, too much noise. What do I do? Where do I sit? Where do I even walk in? What if I need to go out? What if I don't understand something? You know, what if I get scared? And working through all these different aspects, and then having the success story of them going to a movie. I mean, that is, you know, you almost give somebody a bigger and better life. Or,
Right.
you know,
Yes. Yes.
I had a client who was very angry, and he would do this a lot. He would, you know, throw his arms around. And I came up with a technique on how to release anger in a safe way. And they don't have to do that anymore, because now they don't have all this anger stored for years and years. And again, you know, I mean, they would like text me and say, oh my gosh, I've just thrown this and done this. And even the one time referred, oh, you better call the police because I've just lost it. And when you then work with them and you can see these outbursts get less and less and less, again, what a you know, amazing thing. Or they feel comfortable enough to start volunteering somewhere, to be out there with other people, or even just learning how to chit chat. If you think about relationships, no matter where you go, we chit chat. But to somebody on the autism spectrum, what's the point of chit chatting? Why should we do it? So you give explanation, you tap on it, you guide them through it, whatever stops them. And actually, so they learn to communicate better with just anybody out there. You know, and again, I mean, all these are like sort of little tasks or little things to overcome. And I always say, when you work on something, work on the now. Don't dredge up the past unless the person brings it up. Don't dig in the past, because there's so much going on for them now. If they bring it up, obviously, but stick to the now. Because if making a sandwich or crossing the road or talking to a stranger is already so triggering, then, you know, help with that now, so they have success stories, so they're more willing to follow you with the next bit you might attempt doing, whatever, you know, the challenge is, or whatever they want to do. So yeah, I mean, and trust
I
me, I've
love
got
that. I
plenty
love
more.
that, I love that. Yeah, I can see that you have, I just, I'm in awe. Like you have so much knowledge and wisdom on this topic. And I'm so grateful. I'm so glad that you are, making a difference in the lives of these individuals. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. So grateful. And coming back to what you said, it's all about improving the quality of life. And that is something is so challenged for many, many, parents, caregivers, and the individuals on the spectrum. God knows what is going on in their body
Yeah,
and mind. So
yeah,
it's so nice that you've learned about autism, and you've brought this technique, integrated tapping, into their lives and helping them improve their lives. And that is
yeah.
so awesome, Andrea. So thanks to you for that. Many, many thanks to you for that. And this is just a personal request from me. If we could, walk us through a couple of rounds of tapping before we wrap up the call, I would really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, I like to start off here with, just sort of, and just allow yourself to just enjoy the fact that you heard about tapping, and that there's possibilities which you might not have thought of before, and that there's hope. for every single person out there who somehow has been affected by autism, that there is a way forward. There is a way to help that person to actually, like you said, have a better quality of life. And especially when, you know, there's so many struggles, daily struggles, and sometimes things seem hopeless, don't give up hope. Because EFT has honestly been influential to change people. It might not be the fastest train, but it's certainly moving forward. So I want to encourage every single person, do the tapping on you and with, if possible, on the person you look after, so they too can have a better life. And that's my wish for you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. And the audience, if you're watching this, parents, caregivers, please spread the word about tapping. And if you want to contact Andrea, you can contact her at pusey.andrea@yahoo.com. I will also make sure that I put the email in the description box on YouTube. And thanks again for doing this. Love this conversation.
Thank you as well for inviting me. Much appreciated.